Hi everybody, this is Agnes from Sediment, and today we are going to taste Nebbiolo at several price categories to see if it is really worth upgrading to Barolo and Barbaresco. It might not be the greatest secret that I love my Nebbiolo grape. Often referred to as the Pinot Noir of northern Italy, it has a lot of character and a sensitivity to the terroir it is grown in that can make it truly seductive. I have made several videos focusing just on this magnificent grape, so today I would rather not delve too much into its characteristics and styles. Instead, I want to focus on what you guys have been telling me in the comments, and that is the ever-present topic of price and value of wine. But before we continue, I want to note that there are amazing Nebbiolos outside of its principal home of Piedmont, but for today I have chosen to focus on Langhe, as it is the easier way to address the issue. So here it goes. Many of you have commented that Barolo and Barbaresco are too expensive and that the price just is not justified. Therefore, the always better option is to look for either Langhe Nebbiolo or Schiavenesca from Valtellina or Picotener from Valle d'Aosta. Honestly, I will be the first one to run after the cheaper bottle and explore better value wines. And many of you swore in the comments that there is no real difference in quality, but I would argue otherwise. Of course, there are great examples of regional Nebbiolo wines that pack the same concentration and power as Barolo and Barbaresco. And yes, there are also weak Nebbiolos labeled as Barolos that only slightly resemble the king it was promised to be. In those cases, it might really fool us into thinking that there is no need to invest in the premium bottles. However, while I absolutely agree that prices of Barolo and Barbaresco have risen tremendously, some wines that used to be very expensive for me suddenly became completely unattainable. And it happened so quickly. However, I will argue that these wines, more often than not, still offer higher quality than their regional siblings. And what is quality in my books? Well, it is the concentration of the wine, the complexity of flavors, the intensity of fruit, how long is the aftertaste, and, not always a detrimental factor, but still important, its aging potential. Furthermore, in these conversations about value, we often forget the stylistic differences these wines offer. And we completely disregard the winemaking decisions that actually shape what the wine is going to be. Let's start with viticulture and winemaking decisions. Labels such as Barolo and Barbaresco come from a very small designated areas, and that land costs much more. Some of the top sites in Barolo can reach 2 million euros per hectare, while land outside the Barolo DOCG can be 10 times cheaper. So why do we always tend to disregard the cost of the land when we are talking about the value of the bottle? There are also yield requirements. Allowed yields for Barolo and Barbaresco are much lower than for Langhe Nebbiolo, so the price difference shows up there as well. And then, of course, we cannot forget about the aging requirements. Barolo must be aged for a minimum of 38 months before release, with at least 18 of those in oak. That is also a significant expense that we must calculate into the price of a bottle. For Riserva, the requirement is even longer, 62 months. In comparison, Langhe Nebbiolo has no minimum aging requirement, nor there is obligation for it to be aged in oak. And all of this, of course, influences wine stylistically. It is only natural that regional Nebbiolos will be lighter, fruitier, and fresher in style with more immediate appeal. Barolos and Barbarescos, on the other hand, tend to be more structured, bigger and fuller-bodied wines, more complex at release due to aging, and the greatest of them will certainly have excellent cellaring potential. So here, we must also be honest with ourselves. What I might prefer is not necessarily what you would prefer. I do love the lightness and charm of Langhe Nebbiolo, but if someone is looking for depth and concentration, they might prefer Barolo or even Barolo Riserva. I have really simplified the idea here today, but I guess what I really wanted to say is that we should not reduce the wine down to the fact that it is the same grape variety, just grown on the other side of the river, metaphorically speaking. But what really is all this talk without a proper tasting? Okay, so today we have 4 wines for tasting. So I have here Langhe Nebbiolo, I have Barbaresco, I have Barolo, and I have Roero Riserva, which I thought would be interesting to add here on the list, even though I was not really focusing on it in my introductory part. As always, these wines were poured by my cameraman, so I do not know which one is which, and we will start with wine number 1. Okay, so this is really floral and perfumed wine. We do have slightly maybe potpourri notes and roses, rose petals, maybe even hint of lavender. And somewhere in the background, we also have ripe red berries, strawberries, raspberries. But there's something also earthy, like slight hint of turned earth or forest floor. But it is in no way dominating. It is the fruit, it is the floral characteristics that dominates the nose here for the wine number 1. Let's taste it. And sometimes I forget to show you the color of the wine, and here it shows typical Nebbiolo color. Never trust a Nebbiolo label that is deep in color. So we do have that typical high acidity, that really mouth-watering acidity of Nebbiolo grape. However, the tannins, we would expect them to be really high and maybe even harsh. Some Nebbiolos nowadays still tend to have those really intense mouth-coating, slightly aggressive even tannins. Here the tannins are really beautifully managed. There is a bit of that bitter astringency that you would expect from Nebbiolo, but they're really beautifully managed. The flavors on the nose mirrors the flavors on the palate, and it is more floral maybe, slightly earthy. There are delicate hints of ripe raspberries and strawberries and maybe cherries and maybe like dried cherry skin. I will give this wine, let me just think and maybe focus a little bit on the aftertaste of this wine. I will give this wine 90 points. I think it shows its character and where it's from quite well. So let's move to wine number 2. The fruit here shows more ripeness, more concentration, more density, more presence. But there's also that hint that we always associate with Nebbiolo, especially maybe older or aged Barolos in cellar, that hint of tar. And I do feel that there's a little bit of that earthiness, playfulness, but maybe not as forest-like as we felt it in the wine 1, but more tar-like. So let's taste it. All right, what I didn't say before, on the nose we do also feel some of that toastiness and some sweet spice that might be coming from oak. And here what we also feel is a bit of that sweet ripeness, sweet fruit ripeness on the mid palate, which I so often associate with riper vineyards, or like southern vineyards or better exposed vineyards. So there is this really beautiful charm. I would want to argue that this wine shows more tannic grip than wine number 1. There is really beautiful, elevated, zesty, raw type of acidity. If the acidity in wine number 1 was really beautifully integrated and kind of part of the fruit, here the acidity is kind of playing a supporting role to the wine altogether. And I will give this wine, I want to give this wine 90 points as well. Let's move to wine number 3. So this one is another interesting example. If wine number 1 and 2 had more of these strawberries, raspberries, these really soft berries on the nose, this wine is more defined by its like sweet cherry flavor and almost smoked cherry. If that makes sense to you, we Latvians smoke everything. So we might even smoke some fruit, like smoked pineapple or stuff. And you kind of feel the cherry, that juicy cherry pulp, all mixed with layers of smoke. And some spices, some sweet spices, some cinnamon, some nutmeg. This is quite complex on the nose. On the palate, this wine is really concentrated and intense. We do have, again, that really big, powerful acidity. We do have broad tannins that just cover all your mouth, and they're quite drying. They are chalky type of tannins. They're covering the gums, teeth, and cheeks. But what I do like here, they're also slightly calm, or maybe I am slightly used to the Nebbiolo tannins. I don't find them that aggressive anymore. I think they play this really beautiful framing structure to the wine. And this is exactly what is happening here. It is developing and it is moving. There is some toastiness here, like toasted almonds, skinned almonds, also like hints of hazelnut. I think this is quite intense, concentrated, and really beautiful wine. But that ripeness of the fruit is also shining through. I like it. This wine also shows much broader mid-palate. This is something that I enjoy in my wines a lot. I've lately started to pay attention more to the mid-palate of the wine. And for me, it is also a detrimental quality factor. If you do not have mid-palate, or it just kind of loses its structure quite quickly, then I would think that this is not the greatest wines out there, but this actually holds its mid-palate quite well. The aftertaste is really, really long, so I would want to give this wine 93 points. I think it is quite great. So let's move to wine number 4. Okay, so this one, color-wise, I think it might be one of the darkest, or at least the most intense. It is, of course, not black or deep, but if we are talking Nebbiolo world, it is definitely one of the deepest here amongst these 4. And now, so I don't know what has happened here with my cameraman, but it seems to me that he was going from the freshest to the most powerful or riper fruit, because this one, I was talking about like strawberries, raspberries here, and maybe dark sweet cherries here. This one now is blueberries and blackberries. We do feel some of that dark sweet cherry as well, but if there is strawberry and raspberry, and I think there is some, those are really ultra ripe or overripe, or maybe crushed, and slightly cooked, not jammy, but just cooked, when some of the water has evaporated and there is just more concentration. There's also some of the toastiness and vanilla, but here the toastiness is more oaky rather than spicy. Okay, let's taste the wine. This wine has the highest acidity of them all. It also has the highest tannin level. It is really mouth coating and grippy and intense, chalky. Those tannins are large, and those tannins are present, and those tannins are covering your palate. But I do think still that it is there to frame the fruit. It is there to give you the structure. It is there to give the point, the beginning point and the end point, I think. It is really beautiful and quite intense and concentrated. I do feel that toasty, that smoky fruit flavor still on my palate. The only thing we have to know is that Nebbiolo is not the most fruit-driven grape variety, and maybe sometimes we miss that. But it also offers these earthy flavors, these forest floors, these autumn leaves, mushroom hints sometimes, and I love it for that. Floral, it is absolutely magnificent. I forgot to score this wine. I will give it 94 points. I think there's power. I think there's greatness in this wine. So that leaves us with one thing only. We have to reveal them. Let's start with wine number 1. Okay, so this is Cascina della Rose, Barbaresco Tre Stelle, or Tre Stelle, 2020 vintage. To be honest, I really love this producer. I found it years ago when I was looking for wine just for a picture, and it was one of the most affordable bottles in the shop, and I didn't want to spend much and I couldn't spend much. And then I tasted it and I was surprised how beautiful and elegant and delicate it was. And if I'm not mistaken, I remember talking about this and saying several times that it felt really elegant. So I gave it 90 points. Its price category is around 60 to 70 euros. So it really depends where you are. Years ago, when I was first introduced with this producer, I think the price was around 40 to 50. It was really, really affordable. So let's move to wine number 2, which I also gave 90 points. So that will be interesting because we have several price categories here. Okay, so we are not even within the DOCG. We are now with Paolo Scavino, Langhe Nebbiolo 2022. So this is regional. So this is your regional Nebbiolo. It was a bit different stylistically. We, of course, are more into the Barolo area. I'm not sure how much of the grapes they actually harvest outside of Barolo and how much of that is Barolo fruit, just declassified from younger wines. But you could feel that there was a bit more power, a bit more structure in this wine. And Paolo Scavino, of course, is really well known and really respected. It is one of the original Barolo boys who went to the Burgundy and got this inspiration to actually start working with barriques. Currently, nowadays, it is not barriques that dominate in their cellar. It is variety of oak, of variety of ages. So I think they have toned down their modernism, if I can say that. Let's move to wine number 3, which I gave 93 points. I thought it was really beautiful. There was power, but there was also some elegance to it. So this is really interesting because this is Angelo Negro, Roero Riserva. So we are actually on the other side of the Tanaro River. And we usually talk about Roero as making these more elegant, more fruitful, lighter styles of Nebbiolo. I could not disagree more about this statement, because if I would want to compare this wine with this wine, the Barbaresco, I would say that Barbaresco stylistically was more lighter and more fruit and floral driven and shaped, and this was more power. But we have to understand that this is also a single vineyard and it has been aged for 32 months in oak. So maybe it was made in that way to maybe resemble a little bit that power of Barolos, or to reach the potential of Nebbiolo in that stylistic category. And the other thing that is really interesting and now exciting and kind of puts into background everything that I said before is that this bottle costs around 25 to 30 euros. So that really means that we can get amazing value wines, amazing Nebbiolo wines, if we look some places different. And that leaves us with wine number 4, the most expensive wine, receiving the highest score, which is 94. But let's be honest, the difference is 1 point between these two. And some critics will argue, what is the 1 point difference between the wines? And that is Barolo Briccolina Rivetto. When I was tasting this wine, I did not say it out loud, but I really felt like it was the king, like it was the power, it was the concentration, it was the Lord. You know, it was being loud and it was screaming and it was being powerful, and it required your attention, not in this really delicate way, but in this way like, I need attention right now. This is me. I am the Barolo, king of the wines. So beautiful wines. We had really beautiful selection. I just would wonder what would happen with these wines if we open the same bottles, the same vintages, maybe 10 or 15 years later. Because if you remember in my introductory part, I did talk about the aging potential, and I would want to argue that these three for sure could age longer than maybe Paolo Scavino Langhe Nebbiolo. I think it had this really immediate fruit, even though I did feel a bit of oaky structure there as well, and I wonder if it has even been aged in oak. But maybe it would lose the fruit a bit earlier than the rest of the wines. So that is also a question that we have to ask. Unfortunately, time is our enemy. We cannot do that right now. And this sometimes happens, you make this really strong point in theory, and then when you explore and when you taste and the practice shows things differently, I do still want to argue that it is absolutely worth upgrading to Barolo and Barbaresco wines, sometimes. I mean, this was definitely a discovery for me. I have not explored a lot of Roero wines. I always liked it more for its whites, but now it shows that there's absolutely great potential, and why shouldn't I invest in this bottle? It was absolutely magnificent, and I can buy 2 bottles instead of 1, and I can buy 4 bottles instead of 1 here. So really nice. Guys, let me know in the comment section below what are your thoughts here. Do you think it is worth upgrading? Do we really can taste the difference of the price when it comes to wines? This was experiment-based for Nebbiolo. I am sure we can talk about it in the same manner when we talk about Rhone, when we talk about Bordeaux, when we talk about Burgundy, Tuscany, California. One thing I will say though, before you all comment, you see, the tasting proved it. Yes, but then again, we have not taken into consideration here the price of the land. They have to pay the taxes, and that also has to be included into the price of the bottle. Okay, thank you very much. If you like this video, make sure to watch this video next.